just like having just about every emotion going through us during praise and worship, we're going to have just about every kind of message all rolled into one tonight. How about that? Yeah. So we're going to have some encouragement at the beginning and some teaching in the middle and some bringing it up from the rear, at the end. And we'll just see how we go here, okay? The title for the message this evening is, Oh Lord, You Know. You want everybody to say that, Oh Lord, You Know. Okay, with the idea that there is nothing in all of creation that makes it past God's ever-seeing eye. And there is not one who needs help that he misses with his everlasting care. Amen. We can think of scriptures such as Luke chapter 12, verse 6 and 7, which I thought of this week as I had a little house sparrow sitting right outside the tree branch outside my bedroom window when I woke up in the morning. And it says, Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs on your head are all numbered. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Amen. We can recall the words of Hagar in Genesis chapter 16. You know, we see that Sarai is maybe more impatient than even Abram is, right? And so she gives her handmaiden to Abram to bear a child with. And then when it goes as planned, in her plans, guess what? She don't like it, and she gets jealous, and she throws Hagar out, right? And so Hagar is sitting by a well, and an angel appears to her and begins to prophesy over her and to tell her, you are pregnant, you're going to have a son, and you're going to name him this, and this is what he's going to be like, and this is what the people around him are going to be like, and these are the things that are going to come from his life, and tells her absolutely everything to do with Ishmael, right, in his life. And it's in that moment that he tells her to go back to her maidservant or her mistress, they call it in the New King James Version. She's supposed to go back to her. She's supposed to subject herself to her. She's supposed to go live back there again. But it's in that moment that angel came and spoke to her that she knew that God knew. She knew that God knew her situation and that she had been seen. Chapter 16, verse 13 says, Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, You are the God who sees. For she said, Have I also here seen him who sees me? Verse 14, Therefore the well was called Beer-lahai-roi, the God who knows, or the God who sees. Amen. She knew in that moment that he saw her. But it was just to prove, though, that he didn't just see her in that moment. By her knowing that he saw her in that moment, she also knew that he had to have seen her in all of the moments before that also. And that was so important because he is the God that knows. Oh, Lord, you know. So we'll see one more instance of, Oh Lord, you know, but it won't come until the very end of the message this evening. So you're going to have to stay awake and you're going to have to stay here in order to hear it. But to recap just a bit, last week as we went into the message, which was titled The God of Again, all right, we saw the promises that God had given to Israel and that they would build again and that they would plant again and that they would harvest again. And mostly that they would be in covenant again with the God of again. They needed to be in covenant again because their original covenant had been broken. And it's important to know that anytime a covenant between God and anyone else is broken, it was never God that did the breaking. Do we know that? Yes. God is not, I didn't know we were going to sing Waymaker tonight, but God is not a promise maker. Anyone can make promises. Maybe lots of people have made promises to you in your life. God is not a promise maker. God is a promise keeper. Amen. And to be a promise keeper also means that he is a covenant keeper as well, okay? And so it was Israel who had broken their covenant with God, and it was God in these verses, God through the mouth of Jeremiah, who was letting them to know that he was open to the prospect of them entering into covenant with him again. And that in doing so, he would also restore them again, and he would bless them again. We read in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 1 through 6 last week. I'm only going to read verse 1 for you tonight. It says, "At that time, declares the Lord, I will be the God of all the families of Israel, and they will be my people." But this bit of information about God never being the one who breaks covenant is completely necessary to be caught by us, because it is never the one who breaks the covenant that is allowed to put stipulations on if the covenant can be restored or entered into again. They don't get to do that. It's not the one who breaks the covenant that gets to demand that the one who kept the covenant has to allow the covenant to remain or to be renewed. It's not the one who breaks the covenant who can manipulate the one that actually kept the covenant in a way that forces their hand to accept them back into right relationship. I'm hoping we can see the correlation to this not only with God and his people Israel, right? But even in our own personal relationships with others, those that we are in covenant relationships with, right? That we enter into ourselves here on earth. And the most obvious of those would be entering into a marriage, right? Isn't that entering into a covenant with each other? Don't you make vows before a man or woman of God when you get married? Before God himself, aren't you saying, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to act, these are the things I'm not going to do? This is me giving my word and my seal, right, or my name, in saying I am entering into covenant with this other person. And if one in that covenant breaks covenant, right, it's not that one who broke it who gets to make the rules on how to reconcile it. Do we understand that? Because forgiveness can't be forced, and forgiveness can't be dictated, because then it's not pure. Especially can't be forced and it can't be dictated by the one who's needing the forgiveness to be shown to them, right? Well, you have to forgive me. Well, you have to do, well, no, God's word instructs me I'm supposed to, and yeah, I have to in the sight of him, but I don't have to do anything you just tell me to do. Right? Yeah. Instead, forgiveness must be given and acted upon willingly and intentionally and purely. And that can happen. It is possible. Even if it's a marriage covenant that has been broken, that can happen. That forgiveness can be given liberally and fully and purely and purposefully. And you can enter back into that covenant again. He's the God of again. We saw that last week. And if he was willing to forgive Israel of all her many sins against him and enter back into covenant with her again, then guess what? That can happen here in relationships that we have on this earth, especially as God's children. Amen? All right, and that is what we saw here on the part of God. He was the one, as always, who had kept his end of the covenant. He is faithful. Think of that. He is faithful. All right, and to be faithful is to retain the covenant that you've entered into. And it was he and he alone who could then welcome Israel into entering back into the covenant with him. His mercies were and are new every morning, right? We went through that in Lamentations. And that mercy in the hand of God, it was stretched out toward Israel. It's like he put all the mercy that he had and he just said, here, this is for you, but you have to accept it. Right? It's the same thing that he does for us. All they had to do was to place their hand back in his, and that mercy was going to be the bond that was going to hold both of their hands together, right? And the same is true for any of us that may need to do that. Maybe we even need to do that today. Maybe we need to be able to picture God extending his hand down to us, and it's full of his mercy, and all we have to say is, yeah, God, thank you. I'll extend my hand up to you also. And I'll put my hand back in yours again. And I'll have it be joined to you again and bound to you again. And I will enter into covenant with you again. And so I ask for forgiveness of every sin that has transpired between the last time I repented and this one. And I ask that that mercy be bestowed on me. And I do put my hand in with yours again. And maybe it's something we have to do in the covenant relationships that we have in our lives, whether it be a marriage or otherwise. Maybe we're the one who kept our side of the bargain. And maybe we have to go, it's okay. In purity and sincerity and right motive and freely and not under compulsion and not under manipulation of any kind and not because you told me I have to. I'm going to place mercy that I can only receive from him and I'm going to extend it to you. Do you want to enter back into covenant relationship with me again? Or maybe you need to see if that one that you broke covenant with is willing to hold out their hand to you. And if they are, then guess what? Don't let pride keep you from accepting that forgiveness and from moving on in what it was that God had ordained to be together from the very beginning anyway, right? Amen. So here we're going to go into some study type of content, okay? But it's good to know, and it helps us to see the place that we're studying as we get into like Jeremiah's content a little more, okay? And so if you're a note taker, you might want to write some of this stuff down. You might know it all, and you might be like, yeah, whatever, I'm bored. Why should you tell me stuff I already know, okay? But all of the prophetic books of the Bible, okay, the prophetic writings that are in book form, they're separated into two different categories, okay? We have the major prophets, and we have the minor prophets. All that was, God didn't do that. The writers of them didn't do that. This was just theologians who said, you know what, we need to have a way that we can distinguish between the two, and so we're going to sort them out. Kind of like the same way that they added chapters and verses to the Bible, right? Those weren't there to begin with. Paul didn't say, okay, new chapter, verse 1 to the... No. So it was just to make things easier on us. Well, the same thing. They just wanted to be able to distinguish between the two. And so there are 5 major prophets. There are 12 minor prophets, 17 altogether. Okay, now what separated the two, okay, for the prophet to be considered a major one, all right, it meant that, no, it didn't mean that they were better than them. Oh, you're major and you're only minor. Okay, had nothing to do with music, majors and minors, had nothing to do with that. Okay, it was just that their ministry and their prophecies, they were greater in length, not so much as in words, but in length of time. Okay, they were prophesying and they were in this ministry for a very long time through history. And also that the content of the prophecies that they were given by God and they then gave out to the people, they were much broader in content too. It wasn't just for a specific thing in a specific time only. A lot of it had a more global impact or a centuries and decades and millennia long impact that there was going to be. And so their words spanned all of this. And so they cover a significant time span and they present a wide array of messages throughout their book as well. And then these 12 minor prophets, the reason that they're called that is just because they prophesied for a shorter length of time, okay? But also their prophecies were much narrower in focus, okay? And there are very specific things that God had for them to say to a specific people group, okay? And so they're considered the minor prophets. I'm not going to go into all of them, okay? Major prophets are easy because there's only 5, right? There's Isaiah, and there's Daniel, and there's Jeremiah, and Lamentations goes along with him because he was also the writer of that, so that's the 4th one. And who did I leave out? Ezekiel. Okay, those are the 5. But what I want to present to you is the notion that these prophets, both the major ones and the minor ones, they were gifts that were sent to the people. It was like God wrapped up Jeremiah and put a bow on him and said, here, this is a gift for you. Okay? Only sometimes we don't always think of something as being a gift, especially not if it comes in the form of a medicine, or if it comes in the form of a warning or a correction, right? We've went over Hebrews 12:6 before. What? God chastens those he loves, or he corrects those he loves. It's how we know that we're actually his child and in relationship with him, as if we sometimes get that word of correction from him sometimes. And why does God correct us? Because we're not always correct, right? It's that easy. God brings correction to those he loves, and we oftentimes need corrected because we're not always correct. Okay, how many of us like to think that we're always right? How many of us, if we're if our husband is saying something and we're saying something, or vice versa with a spouse, and those two opinions differ, how many of us like to think that we're the one whose opinion is right? Or we're the one whose memory is right, or we're the one whose idea should be the one that's chosen, or, right? Amen. We're getting all kinds of amens tonight, more than any other message ever. But what? We're not always correct. And there have been many times where I've had to go, oh, because, I've already told you guys, stubbornness is going to be the last straw that is broken on my back. I know it, okay? So I've already come out in my stubborn, well, it's not me who's wrong. And then I've had to go, oh, it was me that was wrong. I'm sorry. I'll go over here and tuck my tail now, and I am sorry, and I don't know why I keep doing that, right? But we aren't always correct. And guess what? Israel wasn't either. All right? And so God gifts Israel with these prophets. But they often weren't viewed as a gift to the people. And their words often didn't sit well with them. And therefore, they also often weren't heeded either. Because what does Jeremiah say? Basically, Babylon is going to take you into captivity for 70 years. Does that really sound like a gift to you? Well, no. But it wasn't that the captivity was a gift. It was that these words of warning and these words of caution to them before it happened, those were a gift to them. And they could have changed course and heeded those words. And what more of a gift would those words have been then? Or how about Hosea, right? He's one of the minor prophets. How about what he was saying? Okay, Israel, you're a harlot, but I'm going to stay with you anyway. What did you just call me? The word doesn't sound like a gift, does it? Calling her, Israel, out for what she really was, okay? Didn't sound like a gift, although the truth sometimes does need to be told, okay? But the gift part was that God was showing his great love and his great mercy for her, and that he was sticking by her and helping her while she got her act together. And sometimes that doesn't happen right away. But then comes the words that were welcome. And those are ones that we covered last week in Jeremiah 31, verse 1 through 6. The ones that God said as he was proving himself to be the God of again. Okay, the ones that perked up the ears of the people of Israel, like, whoa, what is this? Jeremiah's actually saying something we want to hear. I will bring you out. I will enter back into covenant with you, and you will be my people. And you will build again, and you will plant again, and you will harvest again, because I'm the God of again. And there were angels that appeared to these different ones because what? God speaks to each of us in different ways, doesn't he? Yeah. And so some of these prophets, they saw these vivid, I knew I was going to mess it up. These vivid visions, right? Like what we went through part of Ezekiel just, a few weeks ago, Ezekiel 8, 9, and 10. What were those? These were these vivid visions that he was given, like it's so real, all right? Or how about dreams? Daniel and these dreams that he's given, okay? So God spoke to them this way. Some of them had angels who appeared to them. Others, they're just given like this direct divine dictation from God, like these declarations. This is what you're going to say. And that's what they did. What? The word of the Lord came to so-and-so, and then they would just relay it to the people, right? And so we have to see that in this time in Israel, there is so much idolatry that is going on, okay? Hence the reason Hosea called them harlots, all right? Because they were not true and pure and committed to God and only God. They just put God on a shelf with a bunch of other gods. They were involved in a bunch of idolatry, okay? They were cheating on God, and therefore they were referred to as harlots then. And so this idolatry is going on during this time of the prophets. Now, the time of the prophets in history, it's important to know when it was. So we have the book of Matthew that is written right as Jesus comes on the scene, right? Now, in between Matthew and the last book of the Old Testament, which is Malachi, there's this time of silence. God's like, I'm done. I ain't talking to you anymore. You don't listen to me anyway. I sent you 17 prophets to speak to you. And guess what? You didn't heed any of them. And so from the end of Malachi to the beginning of Matthew, there are over 400 years that God didn't speak to the people, and there's nothing recorded. But when we back up to when God did last speak in Malachi, to when the beginning of the prophets happened, there's like a 400 to 425 year span there. We're talking 800 BC all the way down to like 425 BC when Malachi ends. Okay, so it's in this span of time that these 17 prophets, 5 major and 12 minor ones, are speaking. This 400-year period is this era of the prophets in the scriptures, okay? But at the same time, it's like, because can't you just be like, there's some people that are just like, I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have been there, Mom, if you could go back in time or travel in the future, what would you want to do? Like, that's my Isaac. Would you rather this or this? And that's one of his. Would you rather go back in time or would you rather travel to the future? And I'm like, I'd rather go to the future because I'm going to be in heaven. And he's like, no, but like here on earth. And I'm like, well, I'd rather go back in time. So if we think of this, if we think of the ones who are like, can you imagine being there during the era of the prophets? Whoa. Can you imagine hearing Isaiah actually speak these words? Can you imagine him actually describing when he's like before the altar and the angel picks up the coal and he puts it on his lips? And can you imagine? But guess what? If we would have been there during then, we would have been there during this time of great idolatry. Forget the captivity. Forget the hardship. Forget the no comfort conveniences that we have. Forget all of that. You would have been living in a time of great idolatry. And wouldn't it be just like our God then, that in a time of their worst failings, that he provided to them this gift of these prophets? And isn't it how it works? Isn't it a lot of times in the times of our worst failings in our own life that he has given us the greatest gifts that we could hold most dear? Isn't it? Because it's in the time of our worst failings that we need forgiveness the most and mercy the most and grace the most. And aren't those the greatest gifts that we hold most dear then for the rest of our days as we look back and give testimony? Yeah. We saw it in the coming of Christ, didn't we? In a time of great sin and wickedness and darkness, here comes the light of the world being born. And we see it here with the prophets as well. Remember how I mentioned that they were actually gifts to the people, the gifts of warning and instruction and correction, right? And so this 400-year time period then, it's also, does anybody like this stuff? Or is this like boring?
No,
Some of you are like, okay, Stephanie loves it. All right, it's good. Because some of you are like history people and like history, geography, and all of that. And some of you are like, huh? Yes. Okay. So anyway, this 400-year period then that we've talked about, this era of the prophets, it can be divided into 3 other categories. And it's because of what empire was reigning at the time. So the very first section of those years, can we picture this? Like I made a timeline earlier. I hope you can still picture it in your head. This first one, guess what? This is the Assyrian Empire, okay? Then the next one, we have the Babylonian Empire. And then the next one, we have what? The Medo-Persian Empire, right? It's just like Daniel when there's the great vision of the Colossus and he sees the great statue, right? With the head of gold and it went down for, guess what? It was the Assyrians and it was the Babylonians and it was the Medo-Persians. And then what? Each one that he saw became a lesser and lesser valued and lesser strength of a metal. And guess what? Each of those empires or those kingdoms were less and less strong and less fortified as well. And guess what? We're still on that big old Colossus and we're all the way getting down to the little toes right now where we're living, right? Okay. But that is a whole study for another time. We are not going to go into that right now. But it was these different empires, okay, and the ones that would follow them, how each one would get weaker as it went down the line. But these 3 empires sort of divide up this 400 years, okay? So this era of the prophets is divided by these different ones who were in charge or the major powers of the time. And so Isaiah is the major prophet who spoke to the people during the Assyrian Empire. Okay, and there were others. There were the minor prophets like Joel and Micah and Hosea, and we spoke about Jonah last week, remember? We could probably call him like the reluctant prophet. Okay, so let's think of people in the Bible who had like nicknames, sort of. We have Doubting Thomas. Yeah. Wouldn't you love that to be the one thing that you were known by for forever after that? Like, guys, come on, I walked with Jesus and I saw all these things and I was witness to this and that, and nope, you're the doubter. We're just going to label you that, and that's what you're going to be known as forever, with Doubting Thomas. And then what about Judas, who always had to say, no, I'm not that one? And so what's he known as in Scripture? Judas, not Iscariot, right? Every time it talks about him, it says Judas, not Iscariot in the Bible. I'm Judas, not Iscariot. Hi, it's nice to meet you. Right? Well, what about for Jonah? He could have been what? The reluctant prophet, okay? Or Aquaman, or Dagon, or, yeah. But Isaiah was the major prophet who spoke during the time of the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire had come and they had taken over, all right? And they had just fully immersed the whole northern kingdom, because Israel's divided at that time. So we have the 10 northern kingdoms, or the 10 northern tribes, okay? Think of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we have the southern kingdom, which was only made up of 2. They were known as Judah, okay? And so the Assyrian Empire had come in and they had taken over this whole area of these 10 tribes, all right, and just fully immersed themselves throughout the people. And then we come from the Assyrian Empire to the Babylonian Empire, because what did Jeremiah say? Babylon's going to come and take you captive for 70 years, right? And they're going, whatever, it's Assyria. That's the big shot right now. I don't know what you're talking about, Babylon. They're like all the way over here, okay? And this is the empire at play during this time when we're reading Jeremiah and when we're reading Lamentations, okay? Some of the minor ones would have been like Nahum and Obadiah, all right? Ezekiel, a big one, Habakkuk, Daniel, a major one, okay? And other ones at that time also. And I want us to see something about Ezekiel, who we studied like a couple months ago, and Jeremiah, because they're being used in prophetic ministry at the same time as each other. Okay, and though they had individual things, they were still overlapping. They were what was known as contemporaries, okay? Doesn't mean that they necessarily knew each other or had even met each other, okay? But what they were doing, okay, was being done in 2 completely different places. But do we believe that God can give the same type of message or the same theme, maybe, of a message to do 2 different vessels of His to be ministered at 2 different places of His at the same exact time? Yes, absolutely. It happens today with sermons, right? Have we ever done that? Have we ever caught a sermon from over here and then you go to your own church and you hear this sermon and you're like, dude, they preached the same thing. And God's going, I know, I'm trying to get your attention, right? I had to tell it to you twice. Yeah, but doesn't that happen, okay? And it happens still today. So Ezekiel, okay, who we just came through portions of his vision, he is sent by God to the captives early on in the Babylonian captivity. He's sent to the ones who had been taken captive. That's who he was to speak to, okay? But Jeremiah, on the other hand, he stays, and he's still in Jerusalem, and God kind of plants him there in Jerusalem. Because do we know there were still people who were left in Jerusalem even when the Babylonians came in and took the city? Yeah. They didn't want everybody. They didn't want to feed everybody. They didn't want to take care of everybody. They didn't want to house everybody. They took the best of the best. What? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, the smartest, the brightest, the youngest, the strongest, the best, the well-educated. Those are the ones they took. Guess who they left behind? Yeah, we don't need you. Thanks. You can just stay here. We're going to destroy your city, but you can just live amongst the whatever, right? So that's where God plants Jeremiah, is right there in Jerusalem, even after the fact. And he's still there throughout this whole enormous ordeal that goes on. And so Ezekiel's given these vivid visions, I got it out this time, that describe to the people what the Lord's message is to them. And Jeremiah's given more of these direct words that he's supposed to share, these very strong and very declarative statements that he has to share with them, okay? And maybe, it's just a thought, maybe those words that Jeremiah has to share even come across a little southern when they're portrayed to the people. Because according to Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 1, when it's describing who he is and who his daddy is, guess what? He came from the territory of Benjamin, which is one of the two southern tribes, which is the most southern of the southern tribes in Judah. And so I'm thinking, oh, so Jeremiah was a southerner. I had no idea. And Benjamin was the most southern of all the tribes, right? And so this is like, our family just got back from vacation. As we were traveling back from Florida to Ohio, we love Savannah, Georgia. And so we stopped in Savannah, Georgia, and they have this old town trolley that you can ride around on. And if you get a good trolley driver, like they all give explanations of the city, but some of them are kind of like the dry ice commercial guy. You know, this is my job and this is what I have to do. And this building on the right was erected in, and you're like, let's get off the next stop and hop on the next trolley. Maybe we'll get a better driver with some enthusiasm in him. So we had this really awesome trolley driver. Like, we hated that we had to get off at one of the stops. But as we're going through, right in the middle of the city, there is a Jewish synagogue there. And so he's like, and over here, and you will see, and da-da-da. And he's like, and it has been known that each one, as they gather together, these Jews from this area that gather in this synagogue, he says they have this special way of greeting each other. And we're all listening, and my ears are perked up. I'm like, oh, I want to know what it is. And he goes, would you like to hear it? And everybody on the trolley's like, yeah. And he says, as soon as they see each other, they say, shalom, y'all. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love it. I'm cracking up, Half of the trolley doesn't even get what he's talking about. And I'm just like, that was funny. And so then, as I'm reading and studying today, and I'm reading Jeremiah 1:1, and I'm like, he was from the South. He was a Southerner. He probably said, shalom, y'all. I'm sorry. Just being lighthearted, just keeping you guys awake, for those of you who don't love the history aspect. But Pastor Steve still has his eyes open. I'm so proud of him. He hasn't started throwing paper wads at Shorty yet, but Shorty walked out, so I don't even know where Shorty is right now. But Jeremiah is a prophet. Oh, there he's peeking in the window at me. Hi. Okay. Jeremiah is a prophet for a very, very long time, okay? Actually, his book is the longest book in all of the Bible, okay? It doesn't have the most chapters, but it has the most words. And I'm like, oh, Jeremiah, you're my man, right? Has the most words, more words than Genesis, more words than Psalms even, okay? So he had the longest reign, maybe, or the longest time of ministry as a prophet, okay? And it was from before the Babylonians took over, and he's still a prophet afterwards. And so he sees it coming. He prophesies that it's coming, and he is there and in prison when it does come, okay? But before it comes, guess what? Before something happens is the very hardest time to tell a word about something that's going to happen, okay? And that's what happened. It's the time that word is most needed, because remember, it was a cautionary word. It was a word of warning, and so that's when it was most needed. What good does it say something happens, be like, oh yeah, God told me that was going to happen, but I didn't want to say anything? What good does that do? And do I even believe you that God told you that was going to happen? Why wouldn't you have said anything? Why wouldn't you have warned anybody? Why wouldn't you have told us? Why wouldn't you have opened your mouth? Why wouldn't you have, right? So Jeremiah sees that it's coming, and he prophesies that it's coming, but all of that takes place a long time before it actually happens, and that's the hardest kind of word to give, okay? And Jeremiah has given it a long time before it comes to pass, and because of this, his life is very hard, okay? This is one of the reasons of it being hard anyway. And I want us to see this here, that when God calls us, and what he calls us to will not always be easy. Okay, in fact, I dare to say that it rarely ever is easy. It doesn't mean that we won't have enjoyable moments in the midst of it. It doesn't mean that we won't engage in these amazing encounters throughout it. Okay? It doesn't mean that we won't forge these lasting bonds and these relationships during it. All right? But it doesn't take much study at all of the Word of God to see that what God calls us to will not always, or sometimes even often, be considered easy. Okay? And I believe that the church culture and message of our Western world has done a great disservice in making ministry and making preaching and surrendering to the call that God has on our life to make it look like it's going to be this life of recognition and this life of promotion. Of promoting our own name and our own label and our own album and even our own church, right? And it has made the life lived by the ones who say yes to the call of God look like that is somehow going to then become a glamorous life. And let me assure you that those who do it right, and those who surrender to it fully, and those who are the most humble and meek in the call that God has placed on them, they quite often do not fit the portrait or the portrayed image of successful ministry that you're going to see on YouTube, or that you're going to see on a TikTok, or that you're going to see on God TV on whatever program it is that you turn on. Okay? And your skincare routine, and your Crest White Strips smile, and your perfectly placed hair, okay, gracing the front of your latest book, okay, is not the image of successful ministry that I see portrayed anywhere in Scripture. Because if you ask me if Jeremiah had a successful ministry, and if Ezekiel had a successful ministry, and if Daniel had a successful ministry, or, let's fast forward to the disciples. Did they have successful times in ministry? Absolutely. Did they do what God had called them to do? Absolutely. And guess what? 10 out of the 12 of them were martyred. That's right. The only one that wasn't was John the Baptist. Judas took his own life. John the Baptist is the only one. Not John the Baptist, I'm sorry. Paul. No, not Paul. John the Baptist. John the Beloved. Thank you. I knew that was it. John the Beloved's the only one that wasn't martyred. I believe it's because he's the only one that stuck by the stuff. He's the only one that was still found at the foot of the cross when Jesus took his last breath. All the others had scattered, right? And so I believe he had already shown that he was worthy of the kingdom of God, and he didn't have to give his life for it. But guess what? All of those that we see in the Word, oh yeah, they had a successful ministry doing it what God called them to do. Well, guess what? I don't think I would have saw their bright white smile on a book that is faced on the shelves of a local Christian bookstore saying, this is how you do it, and you're going to live your best life. I'll leave it at that. It's the most popular, it's the most liked, it's the most followed pages and accounts on social media. And what we're missing, or what are we missing when we think that's what successful ministry looks like? And what are we losing when we think that's what successful ministry looks like? And what are we keeping silent about if we're trying to bring that to a place of where we think successful ministry is? And even more importantly, who are we not reaching when that is the focus of what successful ministry is in the meantime? So Jeremiah was given these prophetic words of warnings long before they came to pass. And so he gives them long before they come to pass. And because of this, life is hard. And it's because they didn't come to pass right away, which means that it meant he looked like a fool. Any of us willing to become a fool for Christ's sake? He looked like a fool. He looked like a fraud, maybe. Well, you said all of this and this ain't come to pass. You're just a fraud. Okay? He looked like a crazy person. And guess what else? At the same time he's prophesying these things, there are false prophets who are prophesying all these wonderful, beautiful, sound good things that are going to happen. So who did the people want to believe? And who did they want to follow? It was so much easier to make Jeremiah just look like this outcast, crazy person. Okay? Because his word didn't line up with everybody else's word. okay? And the people let him know it. And that's the place that we pick up when we get excited about Jeremiah 20, verse 9, that it was like a fire shut up in my bones that couldn't be contained. But he was saying, I'm done. I'm not speaking for you anymore. This is a really hard life you've called me to. This is a really hard word you've given me to speak. And I'm just not going to do it anymore. I've done it for 20 chapters. I'm done. And God goes, There's 32 or 33 more chapters to go, sucker. And so Jeremiah was a gift. Okay, I don't think God calls anybody sucker. I was paraphrasing. Okay, and he brought the gift, and the gift was like one of those gifts that just kept on giving. But it was a gift that the people didn't want. But he was like the gift that kept on giving, okay? And so, Jeremiah, why don't you just shut up already? Jeremiah. And he's like, I tried. Trust me, I tried to just shut up already. I didn't want to talk to y'all either. But it was like a fire that was shut up in my bones, right? I pray that the word of the Lord would burn in each and every one of us to where even if we try to keep our mouth shut, it's going to burn like a fire shut up in our bones, that we're not going to be able to contain it, that you're going to get in a situation, you're going to be like, oh, I'm supposed to say something to this person, I don't want to, no, I'm going to think I'm crazy, I'm not going to do it. And you're not going to be able to help but open your mouth and for God to come out. Yeah. Jeremiah says at the beginning, I'm too young. And God says, I'm going to touch your mouth. Don't worry about how old you are. And then Jeremiah says, I'm not going to do it anymore. And God says, okay, I'll just put the word in you like a fire that you have to open your mouth and let it out. And he repeatedly is asked to give these hard words to the people. And so he does. And he's ridiculed and he's put in a pit and he's instructed to never marry and to never bear children because of the hardness that his life is going to entail. And he's ridiculed and he's all of these things, right? And still he does it. And then we get to our closing time. And remember, what's the title of our message? Oh, Lord, you know. And he says in chapter 15, verse 15 and 16, he starts with those words. Oh, Lord, you know. Couldn't we just stop right there? Couldn't each of us just stop right there and say, oh, Lord, you know. Times in our lives, maybe very, very recent ones, where you just go, did you see that? Am I the crazy one? Oh, Lord, you know. Times when something hurts so bad and you want to pour it all out to him and you can't even form the words and you just go, oh, Lord, you know. You already know. He says, oh, Lord, you know. Oh, Lord, you see what's happening, right? He says, oh, Lord, you know. Remember me and visit me. Take vengeance for me on my persecutors. In your enduring patience, do not take me away. Know that for your sake I have suffered rebuke. Verse 16, your words were found, and I ate them. And your word was to me the joy and rejoicing of my heart. Why? He says, for I am called by your name, O Lord of hosts. Wow. Oh, Lord, you know. And can we say that even with the little that we have been asked to put up with in comparison, right, to what Jeremiah was asked to endure? Can we say that, or have we said that? Oh, Lord, you know, you see it, and you hear it, and you know this place I'm in. And if you could avenge me and deliver me, yeah, that'd be great. But I want you to know something. Even in the midst of it all, I've read your word. And when I've heard your voice. And then the night season, I've seen your dreams. And in the quiet of the moment, I've heard you speaking and calling out, and I've taken all of that in. And when I have, through it all, I can say what I found. And it's that nothing compares to you. Amen. It's that you, even with all that I've been through, and even with all that I'm going through, and probably even with all that lays ahead for me, that I still have to face, guess what? I'm called by your name, and I've been adopted by you, and I'm yours. And all of that makes all of this all worth it, because you and your word is the joy and it's the rejoicing of my heart. And that is enough. Amen. That's what Jeremiah said. He said, you know what? I've tasted it. And it's the joy and the rejoicing of my heart, because, Lord, you know. And not only does he know, he knew. He knew what it was going to take. Guess what? Jesus knew what it was going to take. There's a very famous, it's not The Passion, but it's another movie about the crucifixion. And there were times where they put through the movie that almost like Jesus was given, in that moment, Judas goes to hug him, and then he gets this vision of what Judas is going to do. And I'm going, yeah, I don't agree with that. I think he fully knew what he was going to have to do and what he was going to have to go through. Because what good is our yes, right? And what good would his yes have been to his Father to submit to all of that if he didn't really know what he was signing up for? I fully believe he knew what he was signing up for. And still he chose to do what it was that his life had been called to do, right? While he was here on the earth. And so each of us, whether we know it all and see it all or not, whether we know what lies ahead, we already know what we've come through, we already know what we're in the midst of, and we might have been given some insight or vision into what we think may lie ahead, either for us individually or corporately, but you know what? God has known all along, and God has seen it all along. And God is ever capable of carrying us through and strengthening us and allowing his word to burn in us like a fire all the way through. Amen? All right, if you will please stand with me. We are going to close in prayer this evening. I know that was a lot tonight. I thank you for staying awake. I thank you for staying in the sanctuary, most of you except for Shorty. I thank you for being here tonight. He's shaking his head at me out there. Sometimes when there's a hard word to give, a spoonful of sugar helps it go down, right? Or we know in Scripture, a merry heart maketh good like a medicine. And so if we can keep our heart merry in the midst of the trials and the things in this life that we're going through, if we can keep our focus on him, if we can go back and see the examples of others that are given to us in the Word that, you know what, they did it. You know what, if I really sat down and made a list, the call God placed on my life isn't nearly as hard as theirs. So we at least have air conditioning. But what he has called us to is no less important, and I want us to know that. What he has called you to, each and every one of you individually, it's designed specifically for each and every one of you individually. Amen. And so it's so important that you not go, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will just pick up the slack. Or if I don't allow God to speak through me, he'll just send somebody else. Maybe he will. But you know what? It was for you to do it. And so don't you think there's going to be blessing on the other end of you actually performing what it is that he's called you to do? And you know what? Maybe there's a lack of reward of some sort. I don't know. It's not what we work for, but I have to think that it goes better for us when we do what it is that God has called us to do. Amen? So let our hearts be open to him as we close out in prayer tonight. Whether we're hurting, whether we need to reach out and grab that hand that's full of mercy, whether we need to bestow that forgiveness to someone else like we talked about at the beginning, or whether we need to go, you know what, God, I don't even have words, but oh Lord, you know.